Hey there, Vine Kids. Welcome back to our online lesson. Hopefully you've been watching the last couple where we have been working our way through the Gospel Project, and more specifically, we've been working through the book of Judges. If you haven't watched those videos, go back, check those out. Those are some really cool stories that happen in the book of Judges. But if you have watched, you remember that the book of Judges contains this cycle where God's people disobey God, where they turn away from God, and God allows their enemy to overtake them. And then the people realize their evil ways, they turn from their sin, they trust in God, and God sends them a judge, and the judge delivers them from the enemy, and as long as that judge is alive, everything is going good. People are obeying God, they're remembering the commandments of God, they're submitting to God. But as soon as that judge dies, the people of God start turning away from God again, and the cycle continues and continues and continues. And today's no different. We're going to learn about a new judge, and his name is Gideon. Now, some of you may be familiar with the story of Gideon. Gideon is a really, really cool story. I love this story. But if you know anything about Gideon, Gideon was not the strongest guy. In fact, his family was the weakest in the clan of Israel, right? But God chose him to deliver Israel from their enemy. And that's a cool point right there in the story. We don't even have to go further than that to see that, like, God chooses what some people think are weak. God uses the weak to bring himself glory, right? Like, he does that over and over again. But we see with Gideon, because he's weak, he feels ill-equipped, he feels unable to do what God has called him to do. And so Gideon asks for a sign. We're going to kind of do our activity this week is going to kind of be based off this part of the story, but Gideon asks for a sign. Gideon puts a piece of fleece outside and asks God, if this is really your will, God, will you wet this fleece? Will you make this fleece be wet overnight, right? So Gideon wakes up, he goes outside, he sees the fleece, he picks it up. The fleece is so wet that he wrings it out, and it can fill the whole entire bowl, right? So God, through this sign, showed Gideon that he was the one that God was calling. So Gideon then submits to God. He decides to go. He decides to do what God has called him to do, to deliver, to go to battle and deliver the Israelites, right? To cause them to have victory. But then God does this and asks Gideon to do this really peculiar thing. Gideon has all these troops in his army, and God says, you have too many troops. Now, I don't know if you've seen any war movies or anything like that, but most of the time, the more troops that you have, the more soldiers you have in a battle, the better chance you have of winning. But God asked Gideon to get rid of some troops, to have less troops. And that's peculiar, right? That's weird. So Gideon sends everyone home that's scared, right? And then there are 10,000 troops remaining. That's a lot of troops. But then God does something peculiar. He tells him he gives Gideon this test to test the remaining 10,000. And God, after that test, only 300 men remained for battle. So God took this huge army and reduced it down to 10,000, and then he reduced it down to 300. And now that seems like that is not a good battle strategy, right? But we see in the end of this story, God uses those 300 men to defeat the enemy. And here's what I want you to take away from this story. Whether it be Gideon and the weak clan that he was in, or whether it be only the 300 troops that God used in this battle, God is so powerful. He does not need the strongest. He does not need the best. He does not need the worthy. He can use anyone. And that should encourage you. Maybe sometimes you feel weak. Maybe sometimes you feel like you don't live up to the standard, right? I felt like that plenty of times in my life where I feel way less than someone else, where I feel unworthy to do what God has called me to do. But the stories like this in the Bible, and there are tons of stories like this in the Bible, are a great reminder that all God needs is our obedience. And all that means is this: all God needs, all God wants from us is our yes. So, there are going to be times in your life, maybe even right now, where God is calling you to do something. God is calling you to be bold, to trust Him, to stand firm in your faith. And all God wants is your yes. God doesn't need you to hit the winning shot. God doesn't need you to make the perfect grade. God just needs your yes. God just needs you to trust Him, right? God just needs you to trust Him. We see this as all the stories in the Bible are pointing to this good news, that we see this truth at the cross, right? At the cross, Jesus put to death. He put to death sin. Sin and death were defeated at the cross, but instead of doing it in this big, grandiose way, that's a big word, but like what I mean by that is when I say in just like a huge way, where God could have sent an army to defeat the devil, and like He could have done all this epic stuff, but what He does is He sends His Son to live a life, a perfect life, but then die a death on a cross. He uses this gruesome, terrible thing, but this thing that you wouldn't think would defeat death. You would think that when Jesus died, that was it, that God had lost, that his Son was dead. But we see that God used this seemingly like terrible thing, and it was a terrible thing, but God used it to then 3 days later raise Jesus from the dead, defeating sin and death. God used something that seemed crazy to defeat sin. And I believe that maybe He's even calling you to trust in that truth, to trust in the fact that He loved you so much that He lived a life for you, that He died a death that we all deserve to die, and He rose from the grave 3 days later. And all you have to do is trust in Him. All you have to do is, as we've been learning in Judges, you have to turn from your sin, turn toward God, begin to trust Him. If you have any questions about that, talk to your parents. And if you want to, you can have them call me. I would love to talk to you more about the gospel. For our activity this week, I want to have a little bit of a competition. If you have a brother or sister, you can do this competition with them. If you don't, that's cool. Do it with your parents. This is a fun one. So if you remember what we talked about in the story of Gideon, he asked for this sign from God, that God would wet this fleece that he had. Okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to have 2 bowls. It's really easy. You have 2 bowls. Fill one of those bowls up with water and grab a sponge or a rag, whichever one you have. And all you're going to do is you're going to dip it, get it good and wet, and you're going to wring it out into the empty bowl. And basically you're going to turn this into a competition, to a game where whoever fills the bowl most full with wrung out water wins. All right? So try that, and as you do it, remember, like, God gives us signs. God used small Gideon to do big things for Him. I miss you guys. Can't wait to see you. Can't wait to give you some fist bumps. Stay safe. Listen to your parents and wash your hands. We'll catch you later. All right? Peace.